Hi, Faatiha.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank
Welcome to UNDP.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here in the office.
No, thank you so much. We're super excited to be here today with you. You know a lot of UNDP. You worked closely with us for the past 2 years as a SDG socializer, but you also have a lot of other experience with the UN, with other international organizations. So, first of all, I wanted to ask how did you become involved in social issues, climate issues? What made you get engaged, and where does your passion come from?
So, it all started back in 2019 when I went to Alaska. Me and my family went to Alaska for a trip, and my parents took me on this cruise ship. And we went really close to the icebergs, to the glaciers, and I saw icebergs falling from the glaciers. And I realized that at the rate that the icebergs were falling, the sea level would eventually rise a lot, and low-level countries like Bangladesh would eventually be submerged. And I think from that realization, my passion for climate change started. I realized how serious of an issue it was. And it was my birthday, October 13th, so 2019. I went to the UN on the International Girl Child Day, and I delivered a speech. And that was my first um, form of activism, instance of activism. And coincidentally, UNDP is also involved because that same conference I met with Ms. Jackensteiner, whom I'm sure you know, is the manager, is the administrator at the UNDP. And so UNDP is also closely tied in with my journey and the beginning of my advocacy.
And how did you get to the UN in the first place? I mean, you mentioned that you came and you made a speech. How did you connect to that? I mean, how did you make your first appearance there?
Because, like I said, it was International Girl Child Day, and so it was an event, and I went as a participant at first. But then when they realized that I was, the only I was 7 years old at that time. When they realized that I was the only 7-year-old, they kind of handed me the mic. They asked me if I wanted to speak, and that's like how I started speaking, basically.
And what did you feel like when you spoke there? Do you still remember?
I remember at first I was very nervous because I was speaking, in front of such a large audience. But then as I started realizing that everyone was appreciating me and everyone was actually listening to me, I was more confident, and I was able to deliver my speech smoothly. So it was a very exciting and thrilling experience. And it was also very memorable since, it's the first time that I spoke at the UN.
Okay, so you were 7 years old back then.
Yeah.
Now you're 12. You're turning 13, right?
Yeah.
Next month. So what happened in these past 5 years? Can you share a little bit about your journey and what you've done and what you've worked on and advocated for?
So since that day and for the past 5 to 6 years, I've been able to make a lot of progress in my activism. I've definitely reached a broader audience with my social media. And I think I've also been able to raise awareness significantly among the people. I also have partnerships with different organizations such as, UNDP, UNICEF, BRAC, Pure Earth, UNHCR, etc. And through these partner organizations, I've been able to further my audience, and I've been able to raise awareness more. I also have my own organization, which is called Child D, and it stands for Climate, Health, Information, Learning, and Development. And this organization is still relatively new and small, but I plan to, work with partner organizations and broaden the work that I do, not only in terms of like activism, but also the work that I do on the field. And so basically the past 5 to 6 years have definitely been full of exciting events, and it's been a very exciting journey.
And so your own organization, is it you? Are there other people involved in that? What does it focus on? Is it advocacy, but do you do other type of things as well in the organization?
It is advocacy. It's related. It's like centered on climate change, human rights, raising awareness about these issues. Currently, it's just me, and the partner organizations, but I plan to like broaden that, and I plan to make it a big organization because it's relatively new. So I plan to work on it as time goes on.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the social media platforms that you're on, which are the most popular, if you say here in Bangladesh, but also if you have followers outside, what platforms are they
So
on? What are you on?
yeah, in terms of Bangladesh, I think my biggest audience in Bangladesh is on Facebook. YouTube as well, and I connect with people outside, like in other countries, through LinkedIn. LinkedIn is definitely a big help as I get a lot of opportunities from there. I also get to communicate with other people, listen to their stories, their journeys, how we can collaborate. So LinkedIn is also a very big platform. Yeah.
How about Twitter or TikTok and others?
I have TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, but it's not as popular, I guess, or as known as my Facebook, my YouTube, and LinkedIn.
And
Yeah.
how much time do you spend every day in terms of communicating through your platforms?
I don't manage my social media page or like my social media accounts. It's like my parents,
Okay.
because obviously because I'm underage and everything. So they're the ones who like supervises it. I don't spend a lot of time on social media. I try to limit the time that I spend because I have to spend a lot of time on devices either way for my advocacy or for school for other uses. So I try to limit the amount of time I spend on devices and on social media.
And how do you combine, because I understand you're also a very good student, so how do you combine activism, both like national, regional, global activism, with also studying?
It's a question that I get a lot because everyone says, "Oh, you have your school and then you have homework and then you have your activism, you have um, extracurriculars. How do you manage all that?" Really, it seems like a lot of pressure, but I try to divide the work that I have within my week. So when I divide everything that I have, all my tasks or everything that I need to do, it isn't that much of a pressure. It doesn't seem like a pressure at all. And because like I'm able to manage my time wisely, it is very easy for me to complete all my tasks and have free time a lot at the same time.
Okay, so you're born here in Bangladesh and you also lived abroad, right?
I lived in the US for the past 9 years. I went to the US when I was 4 years old, and I recently moved back this July.
Okay, July this year.
This yeah.
And how, in during these years when you lived outside, do you also come back once a year, or every other year, or
I actually haven't come back to Bangladesh like in the past 9 years after moving there. I definitely had connections with people in Bangladesh, with my family and everything, but I haven't, traveled back and forth.
and what has been your impression since you came back? Because it's been quite a tumultuous time, we could say, for the last
Right.
2 or 3 months. I mean, when you came back, you might have had some ideas of what Bangladesh would be like, and how do those compare to where we are now, for example?
The events that have happened over the past month or so has really enriched and expanded my perspective on the youth of Bangladesh, especially because we've seen that the youth of Bangladesh have created a huge change in the country. And that experience or witnessing that has made me realize how much the youth can do. And it's made me understand that the youth of this country are not waiting for other people to make the change. They're the ones who are implementing and making the change themselves and experiencing this firsthand. Because if I was back in New York right now, I would definitely hear about like these events on the news, but actually experiencing it and staying in Bangladesh while everything unfolded was definitely a big change in my perspective. And I've definitely like been able to understand more of the youth's perspective and how strong they are.
And how do you feel the similarities or differences between young people in the US or young people here or young people in other places with whom you have interacted through your activism? Similarities, differences?
I think the youth in the entire world, not just this country, we've seen over the past couple of years that the youth have really stepped up to their role. They are not waiting, like I said, for other people to make the changes, for the world leaders to make the changes. They're the ones making the changes themselves. They're part of these decision-making processes. They're part of different organizations and institutions. They're making these changes and they're implementing these changes themselves. And so in terms of similarities, I think the youth across the world, they're all the same because they all have this strong passion and the strong urge to make the world a better place.
That's very good to hear. No, I'm from Sweden, and I'm sure you know of Greta Thunberg, who's also
Yeah.
an activist. I think, I mean, from protesting outside the Swedish parliament every Friday to also become a bit of a global phenomenon. So it's very interesting to see how also the social media platform gives opportunities to young people like yourself to really spread the word and have messages penetrate all across the world.
So if I could just ask you, how has this transition to this new Bangladesh, how has these events impacted the work of UNDP and their activities?
Okay, so we, as UNDP, we prepare plans with the government every 4 or 5 years on the big issues that we're going to work on. So socioeconomic development, maybe social protection, private sector engagement, climate change mitigation and adaptation. So we do and governance issues. So we work in these through different type of projects and so on. But always when there's a change in administration of government, there also change for priorities. So after the changes of the past month or so, some new topics have really come to the fore, which most of them have to do with governance-related issues, transparency, accountability, anti-corruption, rule of law, security sector reform. So some of these areas we are now looking more closely at. In many of the areas, we have had programs and projects for many years. So we have supported, for example, elections, or we worked with the parliament for 20 years. But perhaps with the changes now, some of those programs need to be slightly refocused or redirected, while at the same time, there are some completely new priorities that will also take on board. So it's a mix between ongoing issues, adapting, and bringing new things to the fore.
And climate change continues to be an extremely important topic, not just in Bangladesh, but all over the world. There's a flood going on right now in Noakhali and Feni in Bangladesh. So how is UNDP aligning with the new Bangladesh as well and continuing their climate actions or their work?
So climate change adaptation and mitigation work is at the core of the work that we are doing here. So we work on climate change adaptation in rural areas, in terms of rural areas, coastal areas, but also urban areas, in terms of building resilience, ensuring that people have access to clean drinking water, in terms of providing livelihood opportunities in areas, for example, where you have saline intrusion. So that type of work, climate change adaptation, we continue doing. And that we are also supporting the government in terms of developing different type of policies. So the National Adaptation Plan, we supported the government in terms of developing. So the climate change adaptation is very important, because when these type of extreme weather events happen that are caused by climate change, then we are more prepared to deal with it. So we work on mitigation, adaptation, but also in response to the floods. So for example, now I think there are more than 18 million people that have been affected by 3 or 4 very severe events of just over 2024, the last one with 5.5 million people affected. So there we are also doing concrete things in terms of almost humanitarian or early recovery support, helping thousands of families to rebuild their shelters and trying to rebuild them in a more climate adaptive way. So everything from kind of the policy to the adaptation to the immediate needs when something happens.
It's so great that UNDP is not only working like on transparency, like you mentioned, but like also everything, climate change, transparency, everything related to society. Like you asked me about the similarities between the youth of Bangladesh and the youth, at the US. I want to know, because you're from Sweden, so how are the youth also similar from Sweden and here?
No, I think it's global. I mean, I think young people are always or often very driven by passion and by aspiration, by dreams. And I think that is very, very similar. I mean, when I was young myself in my teens, we didn't have social media like we have today, but I was also engaged on environmental issues, and we're trying to advocate for things in schools and the society. So I think that kind of activism, you see them in previous generation, my own, but also in future generation. I think that drive is there, that passion is there, and that's very important to make those changes.
How has your experience been working with the UNDP for like a while now?
So I've been with the UN for over 20 years, and I think I have the most exciting, most fun job in the whole world. And even after 20 years, I still feel like I'm jump out of bed every morning to go to the office. To some extent, that passion that I see in you and that I see in young people, at least I still feel that I have that kind of fire that drives me to continue working. So I've been fortunate. I worked for different UN agencies. I worked in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, at headquarter, regional levels, country office levels. So it's also immensely fulfilling to be able to meet so many fantastic people, so many change makers around the world, but also be able to dedicate your career to improve the lives of other people.
I want to know, does UNDP have any specific goals in the future, or like what are the plans for the future for UNDP?
Yeah, I mean, the most immediate that we have is the 2030 agenda, of course. And the UNGA is ongoing, so the Summit of the Future. So I think all of us are now in the process to look what's coming next, what's the next targets going to be, and that's what we will be striving towards. So we are, I mean, fully aligned with supporting the global goals, whatever they are called, the future ones, and that's also where all of us will align behind the countries, behind, the international community. So after moving back here in July, only a couple of months, with all the exciting things that's happening in Bangladesh, how do you see the coming 3, 4, 5 years for you here?
Um, right now, my plans are that I want to work with the organizations that are basically based in Bangladesh, like UNICEF Bangladesh, UNDP Bangladesh, Pure Earth, BRAC. Because I'm already part of these organizations, but I want to further like work with them, and I also want to grow my own organization, like I said. So advocacy or activism related, that's my plan. And I'm also enrolled at Aga Khan Academy, Dhaka. So now I'm like staying, my plan is to stay here for the next couple of years, and kind of help to grow and contribute to Bangladesh 2.0, basically. Yeah.
Wonderful. And have you been able to travel extensively? Have you traveled a lot in Bangladesh?
No, I've just arrived like 2 months ago, but I want to travel because me and my family, we love to travel. So I definitely want to see everything in Bangladesh. Especially since I've come after 9 years, I'm sure there's many new things.
Yeah, definitely. We will be super happy to have you to visit some of our programs and projects in some of the areas that we're all discussing on climate change adaptation and so on.
How is UNDP empowering the youth of Bangladesh, and what steps is UNDP taking to raise the voice of these youths and give them the platform to speak?
So we're engaging with young people through a lot of our programs and projects, of course. The UN as a whole has, for example, the UN country team, where all the UN agencies are sitting together, have a youth advisory group that also informs and works as a sounding board for some of the work that we are doing. But UNDP specifically also have youth focused programs, but we're also trying to involve youth in everything we do. I think what has come to fore with what happened over the last couple of months is that it's even a much stronger focus in all our engagement with advisors, with the new counterparts in government. Everybody is stressing youth needs to be consulted. It cannot be ad hoc. It cannot just be for show. It has to be built into everything we do to make sure that the voices are heard, and not also only of people in Dhaka, but also of people across the country, from vulnerable groups, women, people with disability, people from different ethnic or religious backgrounds. So really important to get all those voices brought in and put into the policies and programs for the future, and kind of institutionalizing these platforms as well.
Okay.
So what would you say if you would say something to the young people of Bangladesh? What would be a message that you would like to give them?
A message that I would give to the youth or the young people of Bangladesh is that in light of recent context, we've seen that the youth have the power. And so I would encourage these youth to use that power to establish more changes in society and contribute to building the world, into building and making the world a better place. Because we know that we cannot depend on world leaders to make these changes for us. We cannot depend on these world leaders to do what we want them to do. We have to step up. These youth have to step up and make the changes themselves, because it is our generation that will be impacted by the decisions that we make today. So I would really encourage all the youth to come together, to collaborate, and actually effectively establish these changes in society.
So no, thank you so much for the chat today, and I'm
Thank you.
wishing you all the best going forward, and also look very much forward to be working closely together.
Of course, I want to work together and collaborate more.